What kind of town steps over a dying man like he has nothing but dirt under their boots? The question hit Thomas Wade the moment he saw the crowd outside the Mercantile. It was a strange sight for a quiet Saturday morning. Too many people. Too much silence. He guided his horse closer, expecting a sale or maybe a sermon. But what he found made his stomach twist. A man lay bleeding in the dust, and 50 people stood around him like he was a forgotten sack of grain. Thomas dismounted fast. His boots hit the ground so hard a few people flinched. He pushed through the crowd, and the smell of blood hit him sharp and heavy. The old man lay near the porch steps, his face turned toward the sun. Blood had soaked through his shirt and darkened the dirt under his shoulder. "What happened?" Thomas asked. The storekeeper wiped his hands on his apron. "Don't know. He showed up an hour ago. Probably drunk." "Drunk men don't bleed like this." The storekeeper shrugged. "Well, he ain't our problem." Thomas looked around. The men staring at their boots. The women pulling their children away. The silence that said everything about fear and shame. He knelt beside the old man. The man's face was lined with deep cuts of age and sun. His hair matted with dried blood. His breathing was thin and shaky. Thomas reached to steady him, and that was when he saw the eyes. Even half open, even fading, those eyes sparked something deep in Thomas's chest. A memory long buried. A voice he hadn't heard in 15 years. A moment that had shaped his whole life. "God Almighty," Thomas whispered. "I know him." He leaned closer. The man's coat had fallen open, and something metal glinted in the light. A cavalry medal, the ribbon faded, edges frayed, but still proud. Thomas felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs. His hand went to the locket under his shirt, the one Mary gave him all those years ago, the one she gave him after the rescue. The storekeeper called out, "Thomas, don't make trouble. He's probably been discharged. Not worth your time." Thomas didn't answer. His throat felt tight. "He's worth more than this whole street." The old man stirred. His lips moved. "Just let me rest here, son." His voice was rough, but underneath it was steel, the voice of a commander. Thomas swallowed hard. His hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. "Easy, Captain," Thomas said quietly. "I've got you." The man's eyes opened a little more. Confusion clouded them. He didn't know Thomas, but Thomas knew him. "I owe you," Thomas whispered. The crowd stepped back as Thomas slid his arms under the old man and lifted him. He was shockingly light. Bones sharp through worn clothes. He must have walked too far, carried too much, and eaten too little. Thomas moved toward his horse, but the banker stepped in front of him. "Think about this, Thomas. You'll embarrass yourself." "Step aside, Whitmore." "He's been discharged. The Army doesn't release a man like that without a reason." Thomas stopped, looked at the banker, then at the crowd he had known for 20 years. "This man saved my wife," he said. His voice rose across the street. A woman gasped. Others shifted, uneasy. 15 years ago, Thomas continued, when Comanche raiders burned the settler wagons south of here, this man rode straight into hell to bring her out. Silence followed his words. Heavy, stinging. "That was a long time ago," someone muttered. "People change." "Yeah," Thomas said. "They do." He lifted the old man onto his horse and swung up behind him, one arm around the man's chest to keep him steady. "I'm taking him home," Thomas said. "If anyone has a problem with that, you know where to find me." No one spoke, not a single person. Thomas pressed his heels into his horse, and they rode out of town. Behind him, he heard footsteps scatter. A mother rushed her child away. Dust drifted over the bloodstain in the street, covering it like the town wanted to cover their shame. "Stay with me, Captain," Thomas whispered. "Just a little longer." The ranch came into view, and the weight in Thomas's chest grew heavier. The guilt, the fear, the memory of that day, 15 years ago. He had almost walked past the man who saved his whole life. Mary was on the porch when Thomas rode up. She saw the old man's face and dropped the kettle she was holding. Water splashed across the wood, but she didn't look down. Tears filled her eyes before she even moved. "Thomas," she whispered, "it's him?" Thomas nodded. Together they lifted the old man from the saddle and carried him inside. They placed him in the guest room. Mary cleaned the wound, her hands steady, her face wet with silent tears. "He doesn't remember us," Thomas said quietly. "He will," she whispered. "Give him time." The old man finally slept, a deep, peaceful sleep that comes only when the body knows it's safe. Mary sat beside the bed. She looked at Thomas with a storm of memories in her eyes. "Do you remember what I told you about that day?" she asked. "You said he saved you. I didn't tell you everything." Thomas pulled up a chair. "Tell me now." Mary took a breath. "There were 30 of us in those wagons," she said. "We had 4 rifles. The Comanche came fast. Captain Garrett was 2 miles away. His orders were to ride for reinforcements. Quote." She paused, her hands twisted in her lap. "But he didn't. He charged. 8 men against 30. He lost 12 soldiers." Thomas felt his heart sink. The army blamed him, buried his commendation, sent him away. She looked at Samuel, sleeping now. "We owe him our whole life, Thomas!" Thunder rumbled outside. Rain began to fall. Thomas stared out the window. "He stays," he said, "no matter what the town thinks." Mary took his hand. "Even if it costs us everything?" Thomas turned to her. "Even then." The storm rolled in faster than expected. By morning, the sky hung low and gray over Timber Ridge. The cold felt sharper, like the town itself had turned its back on the ranch. But inside the Wade home, the fire burned warm and steady. Samuel Garrett was awake, sitting up with a blanket around his shoulders. Thomas brought him broth. Mary sat nearby, watching every small movement. Samuel looked from one to the other. "I'm sorry for the trouble I've brought." "You didn't bring trouble," Mary said. "Trouble found you." Samuel lowered his eyes. "I should go when I'm strong enough." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest. "You're not going anywhere." But the truth was already pressing on him. He knew the town, knew how quickly people turned when reputation and profit were at risk. And he knew the 3 men who would come first. He didn't have to wait long. 3 days passed. Samuel grew stronger. The bruises faded, but the wound still needed care. Thomas split firewood, fixed fences, and kept an eye on the road. Something inside him knew what was coming. One morning, the sound of horses echoed across the pasture. Not 1 horse, not 2, 3. Whitmore, Hayes, Pritchard. They rode slow, confident, as if the whole ranch already belonged to them. Thomas wiped his hands on his pants and met them at the fence. "Gentlemen," he said. His voice stayed calm, but something inside him braced tight. Whitmore dismounted. "Thomas, we're here as friends." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Friends don't walk past bleeding men in the street." None of them answered. Hayes stepped forward. "We're worried about you, Thomas, about your family. You're risking everything for a man who was discharged from the army. There were reasons for that." Thomas didn't move. "Show me the papers." Silence. Pritchard cleared his throat. "The community expects its members to act with sense. Keeping a man like him here, well, it could damage your standing. Contracts could slip. Winter's coming. Your ranch depends on the town." There it was, the threat. Thomas felt the words like a slap. Not surprising, but still painful. "You're asking me to send away the man who saved my wife's life," Thomas said. "We're asking you to think of your future," Whitmore replied. "You owe your family that." Thomas stared at them, long, steady. "Then I'll buy feed somewhere else." Hayes scowled. "Be reasonable." "I am." The 3 men exchanged glances. Their faces hardened. Whitmore spoke last. "You have 1 week to reconsider." They turned and rode off without another word. Mary walked out from the porch. Her arms were crossed tight against the cold. "They'll make trouble," she said softly. "I know. We might lose contracts. Maybe more." Quote. She stepped closer. "Would you have me send him away?" Thomas looked at her, at the woman who had survived because one stranger chose courage. "No," he said. "Never." That afternoon, Samuel sat in a chair by the fire, Thomas handed him a glass of whiskey. The old soldier took it with a nod. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The fire snapped and crackled. The wind pushed against the windows. "You have a good wife," Samuel said quietly. "The best." "You're lucky." Thomas sensed something behind the words, a heaviness. "Captain," Thomas said gently, "why did you come to Timber Ridge?" Samuel stared at the flames. "I was looking for my son." Thomas felt the air in the room still. Samuel set his glass down. "I had a family once. A wife. A boy. I thought serving the army meant serving them. I was wrong. My wife died of fever while I was on patrol. My boy went to stay with relatives. I sent letters." He stopped writing back. "How long has it been since you saw him?" 20 years. 20 years. The number hit Thomas like a blow. "He became a marshal, I heard," Samuel added softly. "Up in Wyoming territory, good man, honest, tough, everything I wanted him to be." Thomas leaned forward. "Then why won't he see you?" Samuel lifted his eyes, old and tired. "Because I saved strangers instead of being home. Because I let his mother die alone. Because I was a better soldier than a father." Mary stepped into the room. She held something in her hands. Samuel's old cavalry coat, cleaned, mended, the metal polished bright. "You'll need this," she said softly, "when you find him." Samuel's hands shook when he took it. "I don't think he wants to be found." Mary touched his shoulder. "Then make him want to. You're still his father." Later that night, Thomas lay awake. The weight of the town's threat pressed on him. He could lose everything. Contracts, support, maybe the ranch itself. The council had power, and they meant to use it. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Mary 15 years ago, saw the flames of the burning wagon, saw her face streaked with soot, saw the young cavalry captain riding into danger without hesitation. If Samuel hadn't chosen courage that day, Thomas's life wouldn't exist the way it did. And when he opened his eyes, he made a choice. At dawn, the council returned. This time there were 5 riders: Whitmore, Hayes, Pritchard, Reverend Alcott, and the territorial land assessor. They lined up in front of the ranch like judges waiting to deliver punishment. Thomas walked out to meet them. Alone. "This is your last chance," Whitmore said. "Send Garrett away and we'll forget this ever happened." Before Thomas could speak, the front door opened. Samuel stepped out into the cold, his face calm, his eyes steady. He knew this scene. He had lived it too many times. Then Thomas's daughter slipped her small hand into Samuel's. "Papa," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard, "is Captain Sam leaving?" The council watched Thomas, waiting. Mary stood behind Samuel. She didn't say a word, but her eyes spoke the question she had asked before. "What kind of man will you choose to be?" Thomas took a breath. The cold air stung. The weight of his choice pressed in from all sides. He stood in the yard, caught between the life he built and the man he needed to be, and he made his decision. The yard was silent. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath as Thomas Wade stepped forward. Snow crunched under his boots. The council waited for him to break, to yield, to bend under the same pressure that kept the town quiet and obedient. But Thomas didn't bend. He looked at his daughter first. Her small hand wrapped around Samuel's, her face full of trust. Then he looked at Mary, standing strong behind them. Then at Samuel Garrett, whose tired eyes held a lifetime of sacrifice. Thomas turned back to the council. "He's not leaving," Thomas said. His voice was steady. "He stays here, with us, no matter what it costs." Whitmore's face hardened. "So you choose him over your own future?" "I choose what's right." Hayes leaned forward on his saddle. "You're throwing away everything for a man who doesn't even belong here." Thomas stepped closer. "He belonged here the moment he saved my wife. The moment he saved everyone in that wagon train. You're the ones who forgot, not him." Reverend Alcott shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted to the others. "Thomas, think of your family." "That's exactly what I'm doing," Thomas said. "What kind of father would I be if I taught my daughter to turn her back on the man who saved her mother?" No one spoke for a long moment. Then Whitmore pulled his reins. "You've made your choice," he said. "Don't expect help from any of us." They turned their horses. Snow kicked up behind them as they rode away. Their leaving felt like a door slamming shut. But when the sound of hooves faded, Thomas realized something. The ranch didn't feel smaller. It felt stronger. Mary reached him first. She wrapped her arms around him, her breath shaking. "You did right," she whispered. Thomas looked at his daughter. She smiled up at him with pride he didn't know he needed. Samuel stood still. He looked at Thomas with something like disbelief. "You just risked everything," Samuel said softly. "For me." Thomas shook his head. "I owed you everything long before today." That night, the ranch was quiet. Snow piled higher. The fire burned warm. Samuel sat by the hearth, watching flames dance, his cavalry coat draped over his shoulders. Thomas sat beside him. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said. Samuel nodded. "When Mary told me what happened, how your men followed you into that fight, how you charged to save them all, I felt ashamed." Thomas looked at the flames. 15 years I lived with the things you gave me, a wife, a daughter, a life I never would have known, and I didn't even look for you." Samuel's eyes softened. "Most men don't know what to do with a debt that big." "I'm learning," Thomas whispered. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "You paid it today." Thomas shook his head. "Not yet." The next morning, Thomas picked up his axe. He didn't explain. He just started walking toward the east pasture. Mary watched from the porch, her shawl wrapped tight, her daughter holding her hand. Samuel stepped outside, confused. "What's he doing?" he asked. "He's building you a cabin," Mary said. Samuel blinked. "What?" "He decided last night," Mary said. "He's giving you a home. A real one." Samuel stared at Thomas swinging the axe. Snow flew with each strike, each swing strong, determined. The old soldier's legs felt weak. He gripped the porch rail. Mary touched his arm. "You deserve a place to belong." Samuel covered his face with one hand. His shoulders shook. He hadn't cried in decades. By noon, Thomas had felled the first tree. By sundown, he had marked 5 more. Every swing of the axe was a promise. A debt paid not in money, but in honor. Within a week, the whole town knew what Thomas was doing. Some mocked him. Some whispered. But others remembered the story Thomas told, remembered the shame they felt. Slowly, people began to come. The blacksmith brought nails. The reverend brought food. A farmer brought timber. A group of young men came after church one Sunday, tools in hand, heads low but hearts open. "We came to help," one said, "if you'll have us." Thomas nodded. "Grab a saw." Day by day, the walls rose. The roof went up. The windows were placed. Samuel watched it all from a chair nearby, stunned by what these people offered. Men he'd never met, women who had once walked past him in the street, now brought blankets and bread. Guilt turned into action, shame into kindness, fear into strength. And when the cabin was finally built, a sturdy one-room home with a warm hearth and a wide porch, Thomas carved something above the door. Captain Samuel Garrett, 7th Cavalry. Not hidden, not forgotten, honored. On the first warm afternoon of spring, a rider appeared on the ranch road, tall, broad-shouldered, 40 years old, with the same sharp jaw Samuel had carried in his youth. A marshal's badge shone on his coat. Thomas and Mary stepped out onto their porch. The man halted his horse at the new cabin. Samuel stood at the door. His hands trembled, his eyes filled. "Jacob?" he whispered. The marshal nodded slowly. "I got your letter." "The one this rancher sent." Samuel swallowed. "Son, I didn't know if you'd ever want to see me." Jacob stepped down from the saddle. He walked up to the porch, stopped in front of the father he had lost for 20 years. "I was angry," Jacob said, "for a long time. But I read what he wrote. I read what you did. You chose strangers over safety because it was right." Jacob's voice softened, and I realized something. That's the kind of man I grew up wanting to be." Samuel's breath shook. Jacob stepped forward and pulled him into a tight hug. Thomas felt Mary's hand slip into his. Their daughter leaned against them, watching the moment in silence. Across the pasture, wildflowers swayed in the wind. The cabin stood strong and warm. Smoke rose from its chimney. Samuel had found his home, his forgiveness, his family. Thomas felt something settle in his chest. A weight he had carried for 15 years finally felt light. Some debts, he realized, were never meant to crush a man. They were meant to guide him, to teach him, to shape him into someone better. The sun dipped behind the mountains. The stars came out over Timber Ridge. And for the first time in decades, Captain Samuel Garrett slept in his own home, with a son beside him and a town that finally remembered what it meant to be human. The debt was paid. In full.